All right, welcome back. We have a special guest with us today. It is MetaLawMan attorney James Murphy. Somebody roll that beautiful intro.
Digital Perspectives with Brad Kimes. Come on in.
Welcome back to the show. We're sitting here with the one and only James Murphy. How you doing, man?
Absolutely spectacular, Brad. It's great to be with you. Love being on your show. It's always fun.
Hey, man, I love it when we sit down and start going. We kind of have a few topics. We just kind of keep it loose, and then you always kick something up, James. So we're really glad that you're here. And by the way, I want to ask everybody out there to retweet on X platform, Twitter support, to get James his @MetaLawMan account back. He's been a victim here, as I have, and so many others, of hacking. So let's help him get his account back. And James, we're going to go over today a couple different topics. So we're going to move around a little bit. One thing I want to touch on is Sam Bankman-Fried. And then we want to touch on also the Coinbase case and the amazing amicus briefs going on in that case. And then we just had moments ago breaking, right? We literally just saw that there was some movement in the SEC versus Ripple case for the interlocutory appeal. Where do you want to start? Sam Bankman-Fried? Is it going to start there?
Up on my video. That's totally on me, my Wi-Fi. We're problem solving on that. But yeah, the development just moments ago is that Judge Torres is going to permit the SEC to file briefs. It's important for people to understand that she has not permitted an interlocutory appeal, but rather this is process. She's allowing the SEC to make their argument in a formal brief of why they think interlocutory appeal is appropriate. I thought Ripple and Garlinghouse and Larson came back very strong yesterday with their own letters explaining why an interlocutory appeal would not be appropriate. Two things, coming out of that were, number one, Ripple said, oh, and by the way, in the unlikely event interlocutory appeal is allowed, we are going to cross appeal on the institutional sales and get that reversed by the Second Circuit. And then I thought Garlinghouse and Larson did a heck of a nice job of saying no stay of the case pending an appeal. If there's an interlocutory appeal, we want our day in court. We are approaching a 3-year anniversary of our reputations being dragged through the mud by the SEC, and we have a right to our day in court. No more delays. We're ready to go. Let's go. I thought it was very powerful because, actually, most defendants, when being sued or prosecuted by the government, want it to never go to trial. These guys are saying, let's go. We're ready. We want a trial. So I thought it was a powerful statement.
It is a huge and powerful statement. I must agree. And I was really glad to see that. Look, they've always had this level of confidence. They've known from the beginning that what has taken place has not been above board, to be perfectly honest, from where I'm sitting. And could you explain for the audience the importance of what would happen if the SEC were to win a stay, what that actually means? Could you explain that really quickly for them?
Absolutely. Stay means stop. So everything before Judge Torres, which are everything being two things, the trial of Garlinghouse and Larson for aiding and abetting a violation of Section 5, which is sales of unregistered securities by Ripple, that they helped Ripple do that, number one. And then number two would be some kind of penalty phase to do an assessment of what the damages would be for the institutional sales count that the SEC won on. So those are two separate things. There'd be like probably a mini trial on the damages, but a full-blown trial of Garlinghouse and Larson. And so the SEC is asking to stop this, which is a sign of weakness. They position it as, it would be inefficient to proceed, but it's really weakness, because I'm just going to let you in on some inside baseball here. And I'll get in trouble for this, but the reality is the SEC is not heavily stocked with really talented trial lawyers that get up in front of juries. It is stocked with brilliant lawyers.
Right.
Don't get me wrong. It's a great job to get. It's highly competitive to get a job at the SEC and at SEC enforcement. It's a feather in the cap of anybody, in the business I used to be in. But it doesn't really attract, when you think of TV kind of superstar trial lawyers. So I've seen this before where we get close to trial and you can kind of sense a little bit of cold feet about it. And the judge kind of signaled in her Ripple decision how she was seeing Garlinghouse and Larson. She didn't have to throw that in there. She could easily just say, can't rule on the aiding and abetting motion for summary judgment because there are disputed facts about what was the state of mind of these two gentlemen. She could have said that, end. She didn't. She said, these guys pointed out that several countries had already determined XRP was not a security. The Department of Treasury, FinCEN, both had determined that XRP was not a security. They went to a lawyer, got a legal opinion. The legal opinion said it should not be considered a security, but here are a couple of the risks. And then they went about mitigating those risks so it wouldn't look like a security. So she didn't have to say that. She's signaling, I see this defense pretty clearly that these aren't people who are going, wow, it would be fun. Let's just go help Ripple violate the securities laws. No, it doesn't look like that at all. It looks like, let's be careful. Let's be sure. Let's do everything we can to make sure that we're in compliance with the law here.
Yeah, and I have said for a long time that Brad, Chris, Ripple, and the whole team there have been excellent stewards of what happens with XRP, whether it's their own personal holdings or the escrow that Ripple is released and deals with as a steward every month. Now, there have been, now we know XRP has legal clarity, right? So it in the dicta of Judge Torres, she said XRP in and of itself is not a security. Massive, massive statement to understand there. Now, we keep hearing, and I've heard Brad Garlinghouse say this. I've heard people from blockchain associations say this. They say that there's only two assets now that have legal clarity. It's XRP and Bitcoin. Now, and I do not say this as a maxi, and this is not to rub it into people, and I'm sure it will sound that way, but, I am not aware of a legal ruling on Bitcoin where it has clarity through legal decision. Are you aware of anything, James, at all?
No, it was the beginning of the Hinman speech. Bitcoin's not a security. Now let's focus on Ethereum. But the SEC has been really clear about, that doesn't count. Yeah. None of that stuff counts, So, the only thing people are going on, in my knowledge, is that Gary Gensler is sort of acknowledged Bitcoin as outside the perimeter, but he doesn't count either. His opinion is worth less today. It's worth nothing, but less than it was a couple of years ago when he was well respected and said, about 75% of these crypto tokens are not securities, and we don't have authority over crypto exchanges. I wish we did. I wish Congress would give us that authority. They haven't. When he was saying stuff that was accurate, he had credibility. The guy had been around for a long time. He had led the CFTC, and a long career at Goldman Sachs, and now, something's gone terribly wrong, and he's made this wild pivot to contradicting everything he'd said before. But long answer to no, there isn't any legal opinion saying Bitcoin is in the clear. It's just everybody assumes it is.
And thank you for that. And I want to be clear to people that I believe that cryptos, like Bitcoin, Ethereum, and certainly XRP, in and of themselves are not securities. I just know that there's no legal decision. So I just want to be, clear about that. And look, I say this on my channel. I'm going to say it again today for people who watch this. The reason I bring it up is because as an XRP holder, I watched 8 years go by of the SEC do nothing when FinCEN, a government agency, said that XRP was a virtual currency, and 8 years went by before the regulator actually took action against Ripple for XRP, saying, no, we got it wrong. It is a security. And in that interim, they approved a partnership with MoneyGram and allowed that to happen and actually blessed that to happen, knowing XRP was going to be used. I can't help but feel like these things were like, that's a whole nother conversation in a video, and I know a lot of lawyers don't like to speculate. So let's go to.
Well, Brad, just real quickly.
Yes.
The word currency means something.
Damn right.
It means it can be used. It means a number of things, but it means it says it can be used as a means of exchange for some other value, to buy a product or service. It cannot be a security if that's true, because, the security's got to be registered, and you can't go buy coffee with a security. These two things are inherently inconsistent. And so when the experts in the United States say it's a currency, that does mean it is not a security. And so it was not irrational for anyone involved at Ripple to say, oh, great, confirms what we already knew. This is not a security. It's a currency.
To that point, this is why I've always believed John Deaton had it right when he believed that this lawsuit was really a weapon, right? Used as a weapon to hold down Ripple and XRP. And I've always said in response to that, I absolutely believe that, but I also believe that someone had to have knowledge. There was around 800 tokens at that time period in the crypto space. How did Bill Hinman know that this would be the one to hold back? How did Bill Hinman know that it was this one that had to be the one to be scared of, James?
Well, look, I was about to say I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but, we live in a world where yesterday's conspiracy theory is then validated, shortly thereafter.
Yeah.
But I've said to you before that as a trial lawyer, I've always said I cannot fully understand my case until I have a timeline established. And when I dug in on those Hinman emails, I know you had been saying this forever. Deaton had been saying this forever. I have a lot of, you guys have credibility with me, but I had to dig into and just line it up. And when you line it up, and Hinman's like, let me get Vitalik on the phone before I give this endorsement of Ether. And then shortly thereafter, a few weeks thereafter, Garlinghouse goes in to meet with the very same guys and says, here's what we're doing at Ripple. I want to talk to you about this XRP. And Clayton makes a big deal about stopping the conversation in its tracks and telling Garlinghouse to back it up. That was the wrong answer, because if the entity of the SEC has endorsed the Ethereum as not a security, it is a perfectly appropriate conversation for a regulator to have with the next currency that comes in the door. Hey, here's how we're seeing your currency. We may have a couple of issues about this or that you're doing or that you have done, where the recipient of this information can say, hey, that's very valuable feedback. We're going to go back and take a look at that and see if we can, make adjustments, because we feel like we're, in the exact same category as what you've endorsed for Ether. Then very shortly thereafter, Coinbase wants to go public. And to my knowledge, the SEC Division of Corporate Finance did not say, we need you guys to delist a dozen tokens. They said, we need you to delist XRP if you want to launch that IPO. If you put that, and this is all in a tight, last few months of 2020. So anyway, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but when you look at the timeline, to me, something there is very wrong. That XRP must be delisted, implying all of the other tokens currently on Coinbase are just fine and dandy. How could that be? What were the distinguishing characteristics of all of those compared to XRP? Now, if you'll permit me, I do want to say one thing that will not be popular with your audience, and that is, I understand Coinbase's decision. If you are if you're the CEO and you're the general counsel and you're the chief of regulatory there, and the SEC says you're not going to IPO unless you delist XRP, you have fiduciary obligations to bunches of people, not just your investors and the VCs, but your employees. Many of them have stock and options, pre-IPO stock and options. Are you going to say, you know what, on principle, I refuse to delist XRP, and therefore I guess we won't go public, we'll have no access to the public capital markets? It's a tough spot to be in. I know, I see this on Twitter all the time, people taking shots at the general counsel, Grawl, but I have to admit, I understand from a business perspective why they felt like they had to do that.
Oh, I think it's such a great point you make. And look, and full disclosure, I get it too. You have shareholders, you have a responsibility, you want to move the company forward. That's what you have to do. We also know that the majority of tokens on Coinbase are ERC20 tokens, right? So all of this ends up becoming like, did they know? Were they aware? Were they not aware? Was it just like, I'm just out here doing my thing, and, everything with ETHgate and the free pass really, look, at this point, I think we understand that Coinbase wasn't really wrapped up into the ETHgate, at least from where I stand, because they're in the middle of being sued right now, right? So, if they were inside the good old boy club, they would be getting a pass, just like, Ethereum got a pass, I would imagine.
Right.
So, and speaking of that, let's talk about that now, because what we've seen, and look, to your credit, I say it on the channel quite often, you rightfully noted that the history of cryptocurrency court cases have forevermore been changed from the strategy of John Deaton and the amicus brief filings. And you cannot overstate what you pointed out there, because look at what we're seeing now. Talk about the array of amicus briefs in this Coinbase case.
Yeah, well, absolutely. I said this from the very first time you asked me on the show. Never met John Deaton, but I just saw what he was doing, and I looked into it, read his briefs, read what he was doing. It's like, this is a radical approach that I believe will be very impactful for judges, because judges are trained and conditioned to believe the SEC actually is in there to defend, the public, to speak for the public and the investing public in the capital markets. And when you have someone come in and say, not so fast, here are tens of thousands who want nothing more than the SEC to just please stop. This comes as a shock to judges, I can assure you, regardless of whether Judge Torres permitted intervention or being an amicus. Doesn't matter. None of that matters. What matters was the message. Guess what, Your Honor? I could have them all here in the courtroom, 80,000 of them. Joking, obviously, but so it was powerful. It had not been done before in any noteworthy way that I had ever heard of. And so now it's become very common to have amicus. So it's a message to the parties in litigation, as well as people in the ecosystem, in the industry, saying, this case impacts us. Our voice should be heard. And it's unusual for amicus to come in on a motion to dismiss, which has happened in Coinbase. That happened in the summary judgment phase in Ripple. But now they're coming in earlier and earlier at the very beginning, which I think is great. And so all of these industry associations coming in and explaining, the bigger picture here and the significance of a ruling has impact. And people, on Twitter, elsewhere are like, does this really have any impact? Yes, it does have impact. And I'll tell you what has really super duper impact is when a sitting U.S. senator comes in and says, we here in Congress did not grant the SEC the authority they claim in this case. This needs to be dismissed. That's powerful. Now, it would have been more powerful if a committee or the full Congress, particularly on the House side, in the Senate, it would be impossible. But I was hoping and tweeted out that I was hoping the House Financial Services Committee or even the entire House would submit an amicus brief saying exactly the same thing. This is a major question of policy affecting a lot of people and $1 trillion industry, and that's ours. We have that. That's our ball, and we're going to decide what's going to happen here, not the SEC. The major questions doctrine is a question of separation of powers, meaning who gets to decide, not whether crypto ought to be regulated. That's not the issue at all. The issue is who gets to decide. Is it a guy nobody voted for who happens to be at the head of the SEC, or is it our elected representatives that we send there to make policy for this country? And if we don't like what they do, we can vote them out. Well, it's pretty clear what the answer is there. It's Congress. And so the senator coming in was powerful. And then, the 6 law professors coming in with an amicus brief was very powerful. If you read the thing, they trace the entire history of securities laws in this country from well before the Securities Act of 1933 and the Securities Exchange Act of 1934, decades before, how this concept of an investment contract had developed and what it meant. And what it meant prior to the passage of those acts is what the congressman meant when they used the word in the act. It, simple, and so there's got to be obligations of the issuer to the purchaser of whatever it is, whatever that commodity or whatever it might be. There's got to be commitments. And in particular, under their analysis, it's got to be a commitment that you get to share in a distribution of profits, if any, in the revenue and success of our company. And in the event of a dissolution through bankruptcy or sale or whatever, you have your, right to a tiny portion of the assets of this enterprise that you have invested in. So if that approach is adopted, then there are virtually no crypto assets that are securities. And I think it's a pretty compelling argument.
I love it. And I know it's history making, right? So
yes.
I can only imagine what it means, and judges are very powerful people, Yeah. But for a judge to get an amicus brief from a sitting senator saying, it's not your job to do this, it's our job to do this. Now, as a cynic, and somebody who sits back and watches Congress do nothing most of the time, I say to myself, well, let's get less busy writing an amicus brief and just start passing legislation, right? Just how about you? I love it. Great that you did it. It is really important that you did it. But what's more important is that you get the moxie and pull together Congress and get something passed, because the truth of the matter is no matter where you stand on this should be a bipartisan issue for everyone, right? So it really should be something that we could get done very easily. I liken it to the Telecommunications Act for the internet. There should be something that has a broad enough approach to get rid of illicit activity and to deal with those very specific things, but to open up innovation so the U.S. can actually get out here and lead the fourth industrial revolution. That's my soapbox right there. I'm done on that. But let's change gears, James, and let's go to Sam Bankman-Fried. Let's talk about old Sam.
Well, I'll tell you what. I wrote an article for CoinDesk when he got that original bail deal, and I was not happy at all because it was completely bogus. Yeah. And the statements about that bail deal were extremely misleading. There was no $250 million bond. It was a flat out lie. The guy walked out of court on an own recognizance bond with no cash, no property of any kind being posted. All that was promised was the parents would get around eventually to posting their house as collateral, and then there'd be two co-signers. So I'm reading all of these articles about, wow, these two co-signers must be really, really wealthy to sign off on a $250 million bond. And it was absurd. I'm now forgetting what the numbers were, but it's far under $1 million that they committed to. So there was never any $250 million bond. I believed that the guy was a flight risk and that he, like Ghislaine Maxwell and Russ Albrecht and Epstein, and the rest, he belonged in jail, in my opinion. And I found it really weird that the United States government told the Bahamas, you need to arrest this guy now because he's a flight risk. Okay. And so they stick him in a really uncomfortable jail down there. And he's like, man, I want the hell out of here. Let's get extradited as soon as possible. So, the marshals go down there and grab him. He agrees to extradition, bring him up to New York. And then they tell the judge, he's no flight risk whatsoever. Let's send him home. And you know what? At the very beginning, the judge did not like it. But you know what? When you have counsel for the defendant, Sam, and the prosecution saying, we've agreed to like really stringent restrictions on him, Your Honor, and an unheard of $250 million bond, let's send him to Palo Alto, California. The judge did not like it, but he went along with it. And so these violations that have happened in the interim are not as egregious, really, as people say. There's nothing wrong with talking to the media. There's actually nothing wrong with a party speaking to witnesses. People don't realize that. They think that's like there's some per se prohibition on that. That's totally false. You can't go meet a witness and threaten to harm them or their family if they don't testify the way you want, of course. But the government every day is sending the FBI out to talk to witnesses and scaring the crap out of them so that they testify the right way. The defense is entitled to speak to witnesses, whether it's the lawyers or the defendant. They can't intimidate, they can't suborn perjury, of course. But in any event, I don't want to come across like I'm defending Sam Bankman-Fried. I'm not. I believed he should have been in jail from day one. He's in jail now. He stole some of my money. I'm a creditor in the FTX bankruptcy. Fortunately, a very, very small part of my net worth was on that exchange. But in any event, what do I think is going to happen now? It's scheduled for trial on October 3rd, where jury selection would begin. And what the prosecution is worried about is tainting the jury by Sam undermining witnesses like his ex-girlfriend, Caroline Ellison, or others. But what's coming is much, much bigger than one New York Times article that I'm not sure many jurors read. What's coming is something everybody's going to read, and it's coming right in the middle of jury selection. And that's the book from Michael Lewis, who wrote The Big Short, who wrote Moneyball, who wrote all of these blockbuster books that were converted into movies. He's got the story. He was working with Sam for months before the bankruptcy in November last year, and he's had 500 meetings with him since he's been incarcerated in his mother's house. So is it going to be like Sam's version of what happened, or is it going to be objective or what? Do not know, but it's going to be a bombshell because as well as I do, a book isn't like just released on October 4th. There's this whole run up to it of publicity. And Michael Lewis is a beloved guy by the media because he's really good on TV. His books are really fun to read, make, complex stuff, really, really interesting. I'm sure it's going to be I'm going to read that book. It's going to be fascinating, but it's going to be everywhere. And so one thing to look out for is I wonder if the government's going to try to get an injunction, to stop the publication of the book right in the middle of jury selection. So that's one thing, minor thing. The other thing is I do believe the chances of him pleading guilty have gone up significantly now that he's incarcerated. It's really, really unpleasant at the Metropolitan Detention Center in Brooklyn. I've been there. It's right on the Gowanus Canal, which is the most polluted waterway in the United States of America. And it smells really bad, particularly in the summer. And inside the facility is worse. It's very overcrowded, overrun by vermin, cockroaches, you name it. And like getting your medicine on time or whatever just is not really a priority for the guards. The guards, so I'll couch this. This is in my opinion. The guards are corrupt and are smuggling a lot of stuff into there, and there's a lot of extortion. And extortion works this way. If they know an inmate is coming in who has a lot of money, then they threaten that person and try to force them to get their family to deposit money in the commissary account of another inmate. At a minimum, that's for starters. So it's really, the guy is not well suited to that situation. So therefore, I think it's more likely now that he will plead guilty and try to get himself to a minimum security place that they call, federal prison farms that don't have any fence whatsoever. And, he could survive there. And then finally, kind of the rule of thumb for trial lawyers, Brad, is you can destroy one adverse witness, but when you got 4 or 5 of them who are senior executives all saying the same thing, Sam knew that we were stealing customer money. Oh, really? How did Sam know? Because Sam told us to do it. That's how he knew. He's going to be convicted. Yeah. So I think his family, his mother and father, and he may be in denial because he's gotten away with, these crazy explanations of, hey, really sorry, I missed that, kind of thing. But I didn't have the mental, knowledge that this was illegal or anything like that. So anyway, I'm sorry I've gone on. I'm pretty focused on that Sam Bankman-Fried thing since he stole some of my money. But that's kind of how I see it, Brad.
No, I totally get it. And I'm glad that you broke it down because of late, what we saw recently is the campaign finance charges that are now coming back into play. It was talked about it early on and it kind of went away. And now that's coming back. And I have to say, to build on to the point what you're talking about Sam's actions, how many of these congressional officials out here received that money and then gave it back? I haven't heard a lot.
Yeah, this is really interesting, Brad. I've been puzzling over this. So there is not a separate count for campaign finance violations because of the issue with the extradition, which is a whole nother issue that Merrick Garland, with one phone call could have said to the prime minister or his, counterpart down there, hey, we want to prosecute this guy. The Bahamas, under the treaty, which I have read, allows them to agree. Yes, of course, go right ahead. And that's it. There's nothing Sam can do about it. They can consent. So this thing about the prosecutor saying, wow, our hands are tied, unfortunately, under the treaty, we can't, that's all not true. So Bahamas can agree. But anyway, you're right. They added the facts of misusing stolen money to donate to campaigns. And, we all knew that. And now it's back in the case, which is interesting. But what's more interesting, Brad, is they added a phrase in there that was not in prior indictments. And they said he spent lavishly on members of Congress to lobby them. And then they say, and other high-ranking officials to approve a regulatory regime beneficial to his company and to him personally. Other high-ranking officials was added to the indictment in the very last indictment. So all we know for sure is that's Gary Gensler. There may be other high-ranking officials, probably are, but we know Gary's one. And now the U.S. Attorney in Manhattan has put Gary into the case. They cannot now say, Your Honor, this is irrelevant. How could they possibly call Gary Gensler? And they're going to say, what do you mean? Here, it's right here in the indictment. Moreover, they get to demand from the government all of the documents in the possession of the government regarding these meetings. Think about that.
Oh, I love
the
that.
Notes, the emails about, hey, I don't know if there's an ETHgate component to this, if they're saying stuff with Gary or Elizabeth Warren or whatever's going on. But if they're smart, they're going to push hard on that, because this is puzzling. I'm trying to watch my language here. This is very, very puzzling that this doesn't happen without the express approval of Damian Williams, the United States Attorney for Manhattan, adding and other high-ranking officials to get a regulation beneficial to his company and to himself personally. That it's now in the trial.
Yeah.
And so you don't have to imagine, this almost certainly must happen, that they call him to the stand, whether the prosecution calls him and Sam's lawyers get to cross-examine him, or Sam's lawyers cross-examine him, and they're going to try to say, didn't Sam tell you exactly what he planned on doing? You said it was fine and dandy. And, of course, Gensler will say no. And then they'll dig as deep as they can. Well, who did you talk to about this? Who had input, before and after the meeting? Who'd you report the findings of the meetings, plural, to, et cetera, et cetera. This is just so, I apologize for going on, but this is weird, Brad. We've got this terrible conflict of interest in Binance, where CZ saying Gary came out to Japan and asked for a job. We've got him hyping Algorand, prior to them launching their ICO. We've got him testifying in Congress that they had no regulatory authority over Coinbase. He's right in the middle of these cases in a way I have not seen in my career, and I've had a pretty long career.
Yeah, it is quite fascinating to watch all of this. And I think one of the most exciting things about Gary being now pulled into this case is the fact that I believe FTX also was awarded a special purpose broker-dealer license. And you have to wonder that if some of these questions will be, what was your due diligence process on FTX before awarding a special purpose broker-dealer's license to a dumpster fire of a company? Right? How did you go about awarding that license? Was it because Sam Bankman-Fried was the second largest Democratic donor to the party? All of this is going to happen. It's, unless they find some way to avoid trial, these questions should happen.
Well, Brad, that's a really important and sort of under-recognized issue. I'm now going from memory. I think it may have been FTX US that received 2 licenses from the SEC. And you're right. There is due diligence before you grant a license to a financial entity. And this is important. The law was changed when, you'll remember this, your younger viewers won't know what we're talking about, but when Drexel Burnham Lambert blew up, one of the issues was the broker-dealer had upstreamed cash to a holding company that owned most of Drexel. And so a law was, and the SEC was like, you know what? We had no right to look into the finances of the owner, and that harmed our ability to see the big picture of Drexel in the whole corporate, organization, the scheme. And so the law was changed. And so the SEC, in doing the initial due diligence as well as periodic examinations, gets to see the parent, all of the finances of the parent. The SEC has the right to look at. Now, think about that for just a moment and what that guy, John Ray III, has reported about what you find at the parent company of FTX US is like a business run by a bunch of monkeys with no records, no understanding of their capital position, no understanding of who's got what or what the trade blotter adds up to, or what the debt position is of their clients, the margins combined and individually, and all of this stuff, or who their employees are. This is insane. That the SEC missed all of that. Yeah, you're right. It should be part of the trial.
Yeah, and if it isn't, something's way off. And I have to say, I don't know if have you followed the Prometheum situation at all?
A little bit.
Okay,
yeah, a little bit.
So there's another company that has deep connections and ties to the CCP. They testified in Congress that they didn't. It is clear in a way proven that they did, and they've tried to distance with language in testimony that certainly doesn't line up with the timelines there. Again, I see a habit here from the SEC awarding Prometheum with that special purpose broker-dealer's license as well. And then to come to find out through the dicta of Judge Torres saying XRP in and of itself is not a security, really speaks to me to the space about cryptocurrencies broadly, right? Doesn't mean you can't have investment contracts, but it speaks to the assets themselves, which then makes me wonder, well, why is Prometheum even a platform? Right? If the cryptos themselves are not securities, what do we even have a special purpose broker dealer's license for cryptos to begin with? I mean, if you're going to have a tokenized security offering, why not just have that on whatever platform we already have now? Just incorporate tokenized assets for it.
I think the answer is what we saw, which is Gary Gensler went on TV. Yeah. I don't know if it was the next day or that week and said, we all know that Coinbase and the rest of them aren't telling the truth when they say there is no regulatory framework for them to come in and register, because we just registered one that appeared before Congress yesterday, called Prometheum or whatever. That's why he wanted an Exhibit A to refute the idea that it doesn't exist as a possibility. And that was further confirmed by that news like last week or something, where I think it was maybe Brian Armstrong said, the staff of the SEC said what we need to do if we don't want to get sued is delist everything except Bitcoin. And I forgot if they said yes or no on Ethereum. All you have to do is delist all the assets and we probably wouldn't sue you. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, it is a schoolyard bully move. And it really, look, I mean, you're not serving or protecting investors at this point. You're causing harm and ambiguity that's costing people billions of dollars all over the place. When I look at what's happening here, one of the things, like you were saying, you look at a case, you don't really know the case till you know the timeline. One of the things that I kind of overview when I'm kind of superimposing my little template over these situations when they arise is, where's the motive? Who benefits? Who benefits from all this ambiguity and suppression through regulatory enforcement? It's the legacy firms that exist out here today in finance, right? It's the JP Morgans, it's the Goldman Sachses, it's the BlackRocks and Vanguards, because make no mistake, they're going to be the ones that come in and buy up this space. And what they're trying to do is strangle the entities that have built this market to be what it is, $1 trillion to 3+ at one point. And that's the power of a regulatory agency too, by the way. Yeah. Everyone says, the US SEC can't tell us what to do around the world. world, it's like, well, you're absolutely right. But I'll tell you what, they can certainly turn a $3 trillion global market into a $1 trillion global market. They proved that because they've done it, right? So when I look at what's happening here, I really think this is all coordinated, because I personally believe, speaking for myself here, that the SEC is under regulatory capture of other institutions like that, only because I can come to no other reasonable, rational deduction other than the person or entities that benefit from this kind of approach are those.
Well, I try not to get into what are the motives, but the facts are the facts. And in May of 2021, Gary Gensler was exactly right and said, you know what? There's risk in this space with these exchanges and the way they operate. And we really need Congress to grant authority to create a regulatory framework for crypto exchanges. He was absolutely right. I agree with that. And then what he should have done as a follow-up said, and I would like to meet with the relevant people in the committees so that we can have a discussion about how we think what we think it should look like, and help develop it, and he's affiliated with a more liberal, progressive political, he was Hillary Clinton's, campaign finance manager or whatever. So if he came in and said, yeah, let's work on this. We need this. There's risk here. There's probably fraud in certain places. We know that. Let's get a regulatory framework in place so we can crack down on these people. Absolutely. Brilliant. Let's do that. Both sides could get behind that in a bipartisan way, particularly when the Democrat appointed chairman says, let's do it. But I don't know what happened. It was the weirdest 180-degree pivot I've ever seen to say in testimony. That's the thing that gets me. It's not on CNBC. Yeah. It's not at some conference. It's in testimony. We don't have this authority. And then suddenly he says, you know what? We do have this authority and we're going to start suing people. So in any event, it's embarrassing. We're way behind as a country. The fact that 27 countries in the European Union could all get together and come up with a comprehensive framework for regulating crypto assets is really embarrassing. You know what? The SEC was a leader, was a key component in making our financial markets the envy of the world, since they were created during the Depression. It was amazing. It wasn't just JP Morgan and Wall Street and Goldman Sachs. The SEC, was doing a great job. They missed stuff from time to time, but they were respected around the world. They lectured other securities commissions around the world. Here's how we do it in the United States. And oh, by the way, look how successful we are. And now we're a laughing stock, and driving really, really smart people and a lot of capital out of our country.
Well, let me ask a question. Final thought here. Stablecoin legislation by the end of the year, yes, no, or a percentage chance, however you like to lay it out there.
It's a puzzler because it seems so much easier than a comprehensive crypto asset bill. Who disagrees that we ought to have regulation about transparency around stablecoins? Who thinks that's a bad idea? Where are they? So it just seems so easy. And, the word was, McHenry said we had a deal. And then somebody from the White House called Maxine Waters and said, no, stop. Don't, derail this. So I don't believe anything's going to pass and get signed by Joe Biden, by any president until after January of 2025. That's what I believe.
Well, that is remarkable, and I appreciate you sharing that with me because, we don't know. Obviously, we're all just reading tea leaves and kind of trying to guess where the market action is moving and those things. Again, I say to myself, where's the motive to not to delay? Where's the motive to delay and to stall just stablecoin legislation, not even broader crypto legislation. And again, it's the banks, right? Those are the ones that are scared of this, but there should be, if they understand this space, because there's like a top 3 banks like JP Morgan and Citibank that control the large cross-border payment industry. And then all the other banks have to go through them in some way, shape, or form to get that done. If they really understood the protocols out here that can help ease the friction in the payments world, like an XRP or XDC or XLM, and I know that there's a few others, I think if they understood that clearly, they would want this for themselves so they could then challenge the gatekeepers and become their own intermediary for what they need to do cross-border wise. There was something else I wanted to ask you before we go.
Well, Brad, I agree with what you just said. And I think what we need for stable coins is a BlackRock moment.
Yes.
So when BlackRock came out and said, you know what? A Bitcoin ETF is a really good idea and can be done safely. And everything that was implied about that. Then now Larry Fink's like, yeah, Bitcoin mining, just fine. I don't have an ESG concern anymore. Bitcoin's okay. We want part of this pie, and we think we can run an ETF very safely. So I think on stable coins, it would help if there was sort of a BlackRock moment, where a Bank of New York Mellon or a Fidelity or a, Goldman Sachs or JP Morgan, whatever, came out like Larry Fink did, and people would go, oh, holy cow, it sounds like the game has changed here.
And, just to that point, before we wrap, I would tell people, in lieu of not getting legislation, watch out for FSOC, the Financial Stability Oversight Council. They're a prudential regulator made up of prudential regulators and market regulators that sit on a board together. They do not need Congress's approval, and they could absolutely come out here and architect some kind of regulatory framework for stable coins at the very least until we get legislation from Congress. So I wouldn't take that off the table either. Yeah, James, thank you so much for being here. Don't go anywhere. We love it when you're here. Everybody, I get flooded with messages. Just to be able to have access to you means so much to me and all of the audience. So thank you once again, and don't go anywhere right now. Well, that's it for us. We'll catch all of you guys on the next one.